All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting episode of D&D Deep Dive, the show where we dive deep into classes, subclasses, and other features of 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons to help you get the most out of your choices. So, today, we are going to be finishing the look at the Arcanist by very quickly going through the 3 subclasses and kind of talking about some of the things that when the Arcanist gets reworked could be kept, and some of the things that just need to just go away because they won't work. They don't work with this with the class the way it is, simply because, again, the class doesn't work and won't work with the suggested revised version that I mentioned. Quick reminder, if you're enjoying this stuff, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon to turn notifications on. All of those things are super important. That being said, quick refresher from yesterday. We covered the Arcanist, which doesn't work in any way, shape, or form. It just doesn't, unfortunately. It's a full caster, plus it has this weird permanent pet kind of thing, plus it has tactics, which are very similar to maneuvers from the Battlemaster Fighter. And when you combine all those things together, it just doesn't work. To be perfectly honest, and I've already had this conversation, and they have the person that I mentioned last time has already said, nope, you're wrong, and I have to tell them this again. Nope, you wrong again. A full caster plus a permanent pet doesn't work in 5th edition. It simply doesn't. The examples that have been given, things like, well, you know, the revised ranger is a pet class and can summon other ones, and the artificer, the Battlemaster artificer, is a pet class, and both of those are half-casters, which is what I suggested for this. Turn it into a half-caster, it works a lot better. It's not nearly as reliant on using its action to cast spells that are significantly more powerful than anything any weapon-based class can have, or any half-caster can have. Adding additionally this pet class plus all the tactics, it doesn't work. It will never work. It's just not how 5th edition is designed. You are giving them too many actions, and it unbalances everything. And the other one they keep bringing up is Planar Binding. Planar Binding is an hour-long spell. It takes you an hour to cast it. The entire time you're casting it, whatever you're trying to bind has to remain within range. So first you have to find something from another plane that you can keep steady for an hour. The easiest way to do that is to have another casting class summon it, but then they have to concentrate on that summoning spell for the entire time. Now, the way that Planar Binding works is if you cast it on something that has been summoned, then the length of the summon spell equals the length of the casting time, and eventually the spell itself, which lasts for about a day. So it's not that the spell will end, but the creature itself is going to be fighting you the entire time, which can break concentration, which will stop you from casting the spell, or it will stop them from being able to summon the creature. So you need a third person to cast, I think it's Magic Circle in the reversed form, to make sure that they don't go. Planar Binding takes a minimum of 2 different casters an hour, casting high-level spells to be able to get it to work. And then, even if it does work, Planar Binding specifically states, if the creature is hostile to you, which would be any creature that you just pluck out of nowhere and then bind it to your will, it will obey any commands it gives you, you give it, to the best of its abilities. But it will fight you the entire time. It will use whatever literal translation or literal meaning it can use to not do what you want. So it is effectively forcing you to react as carefully as you would when casting a wish spell for a day. If you cast at higher levels, you can get it to last for a little bit longer. And the creature still gets to make a save. If after the hour-long thing they make their save, you've just wasted planar binding. So no, planar binding has no reason to be in this conversation because it is such an incredibly specific use spell that requires such incredible preparation and cooperation between multiple high-level spellcasters that it is nothing like being able to, at the end of every long rest, summon a companion pet for you. So, now that I've said that, let's actually talk about this. So, there are 3 different subclasses for the Arcanist. They are the Tactician, the Summoner, and the Nimian Scholar. I said this before. This is one of the classes that doesn't need 3 subclasses. Make it 2. Make it the Summoner and the Scholar, which is exactly what it is in Final Fantasy XIV. The Tactician doesn't exist. And as we look through it, the Tactician actually has some interesting stuff in it, but it doesn't fit this class really much at all. And compared to the Summoner or the Scholar, the Tactician will play mostly like a Battlemaster fighter. Like when we actually get into it, the Tactician could very easily be a Battlemaster fighter subclass and still play almost identically, to the point where one of the abilities is actually copied from the Battlemaster fighter. So let's get into it. So, Tactician first. The first thing you get at 2nd level is called Field Commander. Basically, it gives you a bunch of different proficiencies. So proficiency in light armor, shields, simple and martial weapons. It also lets you use your weapon as a casting focus to satisfy the somatic components. So that is another thing that's actually really interesting, because a casting focus normally can actually replace both the material and the somatic parts of a spell, as long as the material components don't have a value. If they have any sort of monetary value, you have to physically use those things. But for everything else, and that's one of the reasons why most casters will use a focus, because it means that they don't have to actually have a component pouch that they have to reach into and bring the components out of. Because this limits it only to the somatic components, that does mean that the Tactician still requires a free hand to be able, and a component pouch to be able to get any of their components out, or a free hand for another spell focus. So it seems weird that they limited it to just somatic components, especially since there is I believe it's just an uncommon magic item called I believe it's called the Ruby of the War Mage. And what it is it's just a little ruby that you can fuse to a weapon, and it allows you to use that weapon as a casting focus. Now, building a class around the idea that they would have access to a magic item is a bad idea, because anything required to play the class should be built into the class itself. So I can understand them not wanting to go, okay, well, if they can get that Ruby of the War Mage, which again should be one of the easier things to get because it's just an uncommon magic item. It is the same rarity as a Potion of Healing, which are generally very, very easy to get. So I can understand not wanting to rely on that. It seems really weird that it specifically mentions that it only works for somatic components. They also spelled it semantic, which is a different word, I believe. I'm gonna, before I say the exact wrong thing and find out that I've been saying somatic wrong, I'm actually going to just pick up. I'm gonna actually look up just any spell. Of course it doesn't. All right, let's go to the player's handbook. That'll have an entire thing on all the rules. What is a spell? Spell level, known. Spell slots. Casting a spell. Kick a cantrip, wrister. Casting a spell. Bonus item reaction. Long casting range. Components. Verbal. Somatic. Yeah, I was saying it right. So there's a misspelling on it. Page 31 under Field Commander. 1, 2, 3, 4. Fifth line down. 1, 2, 3, 4. Fifth line from the left. Somantic should be somatic. Yeah, so this seems... I wonder if Soren is just unaware. Soren's the person that wrote this. Or whoever designed this particular feature. Might not have been Soren by themselves, because I know they don't do this entirely on their own, though I believe the mass bulk of the work is done by Soren. But other people help. I wonder if they don't realize that by saying that it only works for somatic components, that they're requiring the Tactician to not only have a spare hand, but to also have to have a component pouch. Any other class that has material components, one of the things you can get as part of your starting equipment is a component pouch or is a spellcasting focus that would take the place of a component pouch. This actually doesn't give you that option because your spellcasting focus they allow you to get for class features is a Grimory, which acts as your spellcasting focus. So I guess they kind of expect you to kind of do a red mage fighting stance kind of thing, where you have the book open in one hand and a sword or a weapon in the other. If that's what is intended, it seems a little bit weird. Yeah. Otherwise, like I said, this requires you to have a free hand for any spells that have material components. So I think that's weird. The other thing with Field Commander is anytime you get new tactics, you get to choose 2 tactics instead of 1. So the Tactician actually gets twice as many tactics as any other class, subclass. So this is, again, designed to mean that the Tactician is going to be heavily reliant on tactics. However, when you look at that, a normal Arcanist gets a grand total of 5 tactics. The Tactician moves that up to 9 because the first time they get it, they get their first tactic at level 1. And that, because of how this is worded, it says when you select a new tactic according to the tactics fixture, you select 2 tactics. So because this didn't happen until 2nd level, first level doesn't actually count. So they get 9, which basically means they're going to take almost every available tactic. Because as much as I believe I counted, and there's like 18 or 19 different tactics, quite a few of them are limited to 1 subclass only. So when you take away almost half of them, you get to the point where the Tactician just has all of them. And I've talked about this before. Anytime you give access to, you give people choices, like for battle mass maneuvers or just something like that, but they're going to get access to all of them eventually. What it technically does is it goes, okay, pick your favorite one, now pick one that's less worse, or pick one that's slightly worse. Now pick one that's slightly worse. Now pick one that's slightly worse. Especially if the abilities don't interact at all in any way, you basically turn it into, okay, the higher the level you get, the worse the tactics you get, because the good ones you take when you're low level. Now, by limiting some of these to requiring certain levels, that does take a little bit of that away. But giving the Tactician so many kind of puts that back in to the point where you really don't have any choices as a tactician, you are just going to take almost all of them. I think there might be like 10 or 11 that are available to the tactician. So the 3 worst ones you won't have to take, but all the rest you don't really get a choice in this. You have to take them because you're going to be getting all of them. So yeah, anytime you have optional things, in order to actually make it good choices, you should have minimum double the number of choices as are available to the class. Preferably, if you really want to get some variety, you should try for 2.5, maybe even 3 times the number of choices, because that actually lets them create builds, as opposed to, okay, I'm going to take the best ones, and then eventually I'm going to be taking the ones that nobody cares about because I have to take them. So, yeah. Overall, like I said, I think the tactics need to be reworked anyway to work a little bit more with the Ethereal Allies, just because that should be the defining feature of this class is just the cool stuff you can do with the Ethereal Allies. And most of the tactics don't have anything to do with the Ethereal Allies. And the tactics that do are just, oh, the Ethereal Ally is already doing something, and now you can burn one of your tactics to make their thing more effective without doing anything yourself. So, yeah. Overall, not the greatest thing in the world, but it's interesting. Tactical Eye, when you use the help action to aid an ally, the target of the attack can be within 30 feet of you. That's actually something I've talked about before. I think the help action is woefully underutilized. It's a really, really cool ability. And back when we only had the PHB Ranger, something that a lot of Rangers never thought to do, and they really needed to, is they could use their pet to take the help action without having to burn additional actions and the things like that. And it was unbelievably useful because it could give the Ranger advantage on their first attack against the creature in the next turn. And no one ever used it. They always tried to find ways to make their pet physically attack and things like that, which again was okay. But the PHB Ranger did not do that well, and it required you sacrificing your own attacks, which was never ever going to be useful because Hunter's Mark only applied to your stuff and not to your pet, and it was annoying. So yeah, I like the help action, and this I think actually could be kind of interesting. I think it would be more interesting if Tactical Eye was built into one of your one of your allies, just because I think, especially since the help action is an action. In order for Tactical Eye to be useful at all, because this is a full caster, wasting your action, which you could be using to cast really powerful spells, to just take the help action is stupid, and is never a good idea. However, there is a tactic that allows you to use the help action as a bonus action, which is nice, but it's limited by your tactics. So in order for this to be really useful, you have to burn uses of your tactics to use the help action as a bonus action. And since bonus actions are really the stuff that your Ethereal Ally is doing, the Tactician doesn't use their Ethereal Ally at all. If they're using their bonus action to do much of anything, it's generally going to be help, because it's useful here, and we'll see a little bit later it's even more useful. So yeah, I would much rather see Tactical Eye linked to a specific summon, and make that summon, make that ally, make their focus be that little bit more. Maybe because we talked about Garuda, Ifrit, and oh, I can't remember the last one. Titan. There we go. Wow, brain just went. Garuda, Ifrit, and Titan, being offense, defense, and then area to attacks. And I talked about Bahamut or Phoenix. Well, if we made the fourth one Phoenix, we could have it be a kind of control edgy, and we could give them Tactical Eye, and other things that are built into it to be a little bit more of a control aspect. So when you need that, you'd switch to your Phoenix summon, and you could be a little bit more control oriented. And then you needed to do more damage, you'd switch to Ifrit. You need to be a little bit more defensive, you'd switch to Titan. I keep wanting to call it Golem because in the realms of summons for Final Fantasy, Golem is actually a defensive summon. It reduces the physical damage you take, and has done that since it was introduced. Titan, however, is an earth-based attack summon. So yeah, in Final Fantasy XIV, it's not, and they just chose Titan as the primal for goblins, which is perfectly fine. But that's why I keep mixing them up. So anyway, Tactical Allies is interesting. I'd much rather, especially since I think the Tactician should be thrown away anyways, I'd rather see that get put over to a summon. Strategic Preparation. This is literally just taken from the Battlemaster Fighter. It's their level 6 ability. It's almost, I believe it's word for word. So yeah, like I said, the Tactician should be a Battlemaster Fighter, a different version of the Battlemaster Fighter, because that's literally all this is trying to turn it into a Battlemaster Fighter, which doesn't really work because the Battlemaster Fighter is built for the fighter. And again, the tactics is what they're called here. Maneuvers is what they are for the Battlemaster Fighter. Maneuvers are built around you taking the attack action. I believe the majority of them require you to make an attack in order to trigger them. So, yeah, Strategic Preparation, we don't need it because it already exists in the game. It was just stolen from another subclass. Chain Stratagem. When an ally is attacking a creature whom is affected by your help action, their attack lands a critical hit on a die result of 19 or 20. So there's one issue with this, which is what exactly does it mean, a creature whom is affected by your help action? Does that mean, because the help action is really specific, you choose someone to help. So let's say you're playing and you've got a Dark Knight and you've got a Ninja and you've got a Gunbreaker. So you find an enemy and you choose the Ninja. I'm going to help the Ninja, so the first attack the Ninja makes against that creature is going to have advantage, which is a good idea because the Ninja, because they're a rogue subclass, the Ninja gets their sneak attack when there is when they have advantage. So they no longer need anything else. They're getting their sneak attack. That's good. Now, if this is meant to be, it's easier for the person that's getting help to crit, that's not really how I could see this being read. Does that mean that anytime you use the help action, which is how I would read it, until the help action ends, which is basically the creature you're helping attacks and gets their advantage, that's when it would technically end. Every other attack roll against it gets a critical hit on 19 or to 20. That would be an issue for me, because that massively changes the dynamics of the ability. If this is meant just to make the ally that you're helping, get a benefit, that's one thing. And it's also going to change how you use it, because you get a limited number of uses of your tactics. By having chain stratagem basically affect everyone and increase their critical range just for the use of one tactics, the best thing you can do is aid the ally that is last in the initiative of order, or the one that's just before you, because that means all of your allies are going to get the benefit, as opposed to choosing the person that can most benefit from having advantage on an attack roll. So yeah, that needs some clarification. Other than that, I actually like the idea that the help action can turn into an expanded crit range. I think it fits with the idea of the help action, and I think it could be really interesting. Again, I would much rather see that attached to a summon like Tactical Eye, And that would be something that we talked about before, is the summons. As you level up, the summons would get access to more abilities. I think that would be a cool thing. With it attached to a summon, I do think it does need to be something that has limited uses. Because expanded crit range without any limitation, where every bonus action you can just expand the crit range, even if it's just for one ally for one attack, could become a little bit broken. So that might be something that you want to go, okay, you can use this 2 times and it refreshes on a short rest or something, or it's tied to your proficiency bonus, or for being a something attached to a summon, it would actually make a lot of sense to tie it to the proficiency bonus, but that would be the only thing I would say. Then finally, you get Carbuncle's Sacrifice, which is basically you can unsummon your Carbuncle to get half your tactics uses back. Which again, finally gives you an actual use for your Carbuncle. Because up until this point, the Tactician doesn't do anything with their Carbuncle. They're going to be focusing almost exclusively on the help action for the most part. Because it's so useful. So yeah, like I said, if you get rid of the Tactician and the fact that it's effectively the Battlemaster for the fighter, Carbuncle's Sacrifice doesn't need to exist either. There are much better. Basically, it kind of relegates your summon to an additional resource, which isn't that cool. You know, if I'm going to have a summon creature that is permanently part of my class, I don't want the summon to be there just to be a bottle of additional tactics, additional limited resources that I can just drink every so often. At that point, just turn it into a little floating bottle. And it'll have the exact same effect. No, if I'm going to have another creature there, I want it to do something. It's one of the reasons why people liked the Beastmaster fighter, despite the fact that it was broken as hell. People still played it because it's cool to go into combat with an ally, with a bear or a wolf companion. You know, the idea of Drizzt going into combat with Guinevere is just a cool idea, and the Tactician doesn't. The Tactician, they have a little, bottle of limited resources that they're going to drink, and they don't get it until 14th level. So, yeah. So, Tactician, throw it away, but keep Tactical Eye and change Stratagem and put them on Phoenix is what I think would be really cool. Now, we go to the Summoner. Now, the weird thing about the Summoner has no second level ability. I don't know if this was intentional or if it was just a misprint due to this is done through GM Binder, and every so often GM Binder does weird things with text, and there's not a ton you can do about it aside from manually putting in every single page break in the entire document, which is a nightmare. It is really, really not fun. So it's theoretically possible that Summoner doesn't have a second level ability because of GM Binder. It could also just be possible that they just forgot to put one in, or it could be an intentional decision saying that no, just getting access to Ifrit, Titan, or Garuda is enough of a thing that they don't need a second level of ability, which again doesn't make a ton of sense to me because they're just the way they're written, they're just not that useful. They're not significantly more useful than the Carbuncles, and they're not significantly more useful than the Fays, Eos and Selene. They just aren't. So I'm hoping it was either forgotten or a GM Binder kind of broke it, but there's nothing there, and there should be. So that being said, moving to 6th level, you get Channeled Casting. Basically, you can cast from your Edgy's location, which again is something that's built into the Find Familiar. Another thing that has been brought up is, well, Find Familiar is almost useless. The one benefit that Find Familiar gives you is you can cast touch-based spells from the Familiar's position. But the Familiars cannot attack. They can't take really almost any action, so they're less useful than the PHB Ranger Companion, because the Ranger Companion could at least take the help action until you get to higher levels and you can get it to do other things. Find Familiar really, the most use I've ever seen anytime I've seen someone use a familiar. And this is, again, coming from, I have someone in my current campaign that has a familiar, actually has a Warlock's familiar, so it's a little bit more useful. But still not amazing. And the best thing that they use their familiar for is getting information, which is remarkably useful. That is the best use. Sending a familiar to scout ahead, using the familiar for its senses. We had one dude in the Adventures League that had would use an owl familiar. And because he was playing a human, what he would do is he would take the owl familiar and attach it to his face. We would just say he duct taped it to his face. But basically, he'd have the familiar sit on his shoulder as he goes. And the owl familiar had dark vision, and he didn't. So he would become blind and deaf to his own stuff, but because his owl familiar is right there, he effectively could give his player dark vision anytime he wanted just by using Find Familiar. The other thing with Find Familiar is it does take, it's either a minute or 10 minutes to cast, so it is not something that can be cast in combat. And familiars generally have single-digit or very low double-digit hit points, so they die instantly. Most of them have 1 or 2 hit points. So, yes, comparing Find Familiar to a pet class, they're completely different things. That being said, Channel Casting basically gives you a slightly better version of the Find Familiar spell, which doesn't make sense. You know, it's not that huge a benefit to be able to cast range spells from your Edgy's position instead of your own. And again, there already is a tactic that allows you to cast from your allies' position anywhere. Anyway, and I'm trying to see. I can't find it right now, but there is one like that. So yeah, I'm not a huge fan of channel casting. Again, I'd much rather see it replaced with something that allows you to do something cool with your Edgy, as opposed to just, oh, now you can cast from your Edgy's location. It's not that impressive. Next is Fester, 10th level, and this one is just broken. Basically, anytime you cast a spell that deals damage and requires a target to make a saving throw, if the target fails, you can deal additional necrotic damage equal to a number of d8s where the number is equal to your intelligence modifier. I'm still not a huge fan of the syntax of how this is. Just because we don't see it anywhere else in D&D, and it is slightly confusing. I understand what it does. It doesn't look good on the paper, and I would much rather have a better way to phrase that. However, with this being 10th level, there's really no reason to tie it to your intelligence modifier, because at 10th level, you'll have an intelligence of 20. This is a single attribute dependent class. It doesn't need a secondary attribute to do anything in its kit. So, especially the summoner, where it's not making weapon attacks, whereas the tactician might every so often. By 8th level, you will have 20 intelligence. So you can just say it does 5d8 extra damage. And that's always what it's going to be. It's 5d8 extra damage. This turns broken real quick, especially since this is not limited to leveled spells. This could be any spell that requires a saving throw. So I'm actually going to go back to the spell list to see what cantrips. Arcanist cantrip. As a Blade Ward, Chill Touch, Creep Fire, Dancing Light. Sapping Sting. I think Poison Spray is a saving throw. And there might be, I think Mind Sliver is also a saving throw. What I mean by this, and it's actually not limited to those spells, because taking a single feat can get you cantrips from any casting class. Magic Initiate can be used to get cantrips from any casting class. So it's super simple to get that. But this basically means their cantrips can now do 5d8 additional damage, which is a lot. You are doubling or tripling the damage of most cantrips. As you get to really high level spells, 5d8 doesn't become as big a deal, but when you can pump up your cantrips that much, this does become a really big broken deal. I understand why it exists. Fester, for the summoner, Fester is an ability for this summoner, and basically what it does is it does a potency 100. The way damage is done is they don't give you a specific damage, they give you a potency. And potency 100 is not a super damaging ability. That's kind of like your regular rotation. Your first attack would probably do a potency 100-ish ability, anywhere between 80 and like 120. So it's not very powerful. However, depending on how many other damage over times you have on there, there's one from bio and there's one from another one where you basically can poison them and then do something else to them that just makes them take constant damage. If you have both of those effects on there, it actually bumps it up to, I think, 300 potency is what I read here. Let me look again. It goes up to the 300 potency. So that's where Fester comes from, and it's basically for Final Fantasy XIV. It's meant to be a way for you to kind of chain things and kind of give you combos as a caster. Which doesn't happen in Final Fantasy XIV. For melee classes, you will actually have these combos where you do an ability, and then if you do the next ability in the combo set, it'll actually do more damage. It'll have a different effect that happens because you did it directly after another one. And if you use ability that's not in that combo set, it breaks your combo and you have to start over. That's how you play melee classes, is you have to go through these combos, and it goes to physical range DPS too, like the Machinist has combos and the things like that. Casting classes generally don't have combos as much as they will have procs, where if you do something, sometimes something will happen and you can do something else, but you don't have like a set combo routine that you do. And so that's kind of what Fester is it's the caster version of combo, where it's designed to be used after these other abilities to get the best use out of it, which works fine for Final Fantasy XIV because in a single 6 seconds, let's say the 6 seconds is a round of combat in D&D. In 6 seconds, you have cast at least 2, maybe 3 or 4 different abilities if you're using off global cooldowns and stuff. So that's perfectly fine. Every 10 seconds, you're going through a lot of different abilities. In D&D, in 6 seconds, you've done one thing. Maybe 2 if you've used your bonus action. But that's it. So combo-based abilities in D&D don't work anywhere near as well. And so in order to deal with the fact that if this is based on requiring you to have 2 other abilities used on the target first, Fester would be almost useless. So they changed it to just, we'll give you extra damage, but the damage is just way too high. 5d8 damage on any spell that requires a saving throw is just too much. And like I said, the best way to use this is do it on cantrips, so you can save your spell slots for the big damage stuff, or use it on a first or second level spell to actually turn it into power-wise the equivalent of a 3rd or 4th or 5th level spell, depending on what you cast. Fester, I understand the thought process behind it. Again, I don't think it's a good idea. However, if we were to change it, if we were to make Fester be something that would buff something that your Edgy does, that could be something that was kind of cool. Like the... basically kind of, we'll talk about Enkindle in a second here, but kind of treat it basically very similar to how the Empower tactics go, where as part of their attack you may empower it for further. make Fester kind of an empower mechanic, where Fester will you could even have under each ability there could on the edgy you could just have Fester. It also does this. That would make it significantly easier to make sure that the Fester is never going to be overpowered when it gets combined with something else, because for each different thing, the Fester ability will affect that particular thing exactly the way you want it to. It's not like an overarching thing that could work poorly. So, yeah. Finally, 14th level, you get Enkindle, which basically, as an action, you get to use this Enkindle ability, and you need to use a short or long rest to use Enkindle again. So this is a one and done ability. I've talked about one and done abilities before. They have to be super useful, or people never use them, because they will always think, oh, well, I only get to use this once. I should probably wait until I really need to use it. So you have, I've heard it called the Elixir Paradox, which is elixirs are the most powerful healing items in most Final Fantasies and a lot of different RPGs, where they will fully heal your hit points and magic points, but you can't buy them. You only find them, and there's a very limited number. So a lot of people that play RPGs will just never use their elixirs, because they're like, well, I don't want to waste that because I can never get another one. And so you beat the final boss, and you've got 14 elixirs in your inventory, and in the whole game, there's like 16 of them. So in the entire game, you use 2 of 16 because they're so special, you don't want to waste them. So already in Kindle, I'm not a huge fan of that. Now, the actual abilities that you can do really aren't that great. For the Ifrit, the Enkindle Ifrit is a 30-foot radius fireball that does 7d12 fire damage. It's powerful. You know, obviously, it's basically like a double fireball. Because a fireball is 8d6 and this is 7d12. So it's effectively as if you cast 2 fireballs. 2 fireballs once a day is not that useful. It really isn't. You can cast 2 fireballs when you get your first 3rd level spell slot at 5th level. This is a 14th level ability. It's not that useful. Yeah, it's bigger by 10 foot, but it's still not all that great. For Titan, it's 30-foot radius circle turns into swamp. It becomes difficult terrain, and all creatures other than the summoner or Titan that start their turn there receive 18 poison damage, and it remains that way for number of turns equal to your intelligence modifier, so 5 turns. This one is actually a little bit more useful, but it's going to hurt your allies more than it's going to hurt the enemy, to be blunt. 30-foot radius means a 60-foot sphere. That is your entire battlefield. You've just turned your entire battlefield into poison that's going to hit all of your allies in addition to all of your enemies every turn. And there's no save for it, so all of your allies are just going to be taking damage. Is it worth it to be doing that much damage to the enemy as well? Not really. There isn't really a way that you can aim this so that, other than if you have like a ranger or some other range-based class that's going to be super far away from the enemies, you're generally going to be hitting your allies with this as well. So it's not good. And then with it being difficult terrain, that means getting out of it for your enemies is going to be harder, but for your allies it's also going to be harder. So yeah, this is just doing shit tons of damage to your allies in addition to doing some damage to your enemies. There's better ways to do it. And then Garuda is a 20-foot radius circle that doesn't have to originate from them this time. And they take 6d12 thunder damage and are knocked back. So it's kind of like a thunder wave, but not really. And again, 6d12 damage is not that useful for a one and done ability. Yeah, the knockback could be useful in certain situations, but beyond that, like all the Enkindle abilities are really, really underpowered for the fact that they are one and done abilities. And because Enkindle is tied to the source, the summoner, and not the summon, that means if you use the Enkindle ability on your Ifrit, and then it dies and you summon a Titan instead, you still can't Enkindle. Which again kind of makes sense because that would mean just sacrificing your summon would give you another use of it. But the same route, none of them are useful enough to justify them being one or done abilities. So again, I like the idea of Enkindle. And to change it from Fester, like Fester will augment an attack. Kindle we could just turn into, just a super ability that you have to use Kindle for. I think it should be a 2 and done instead of a 1 and done. Or even tie it to once per summon. I think that could be really, really interesting because that would give you a reason to switch between summons because each one would have their own Enkindle. And, make them a little bit more customized than lots of damage. Because, yeah, it makes sense for Ifrit. But I would much rather see for Titan something that maybe gives your allies resistance to something for a little bit. Or gives them a flat damage reduction. Or gives them half cover or 3/4 cover. So something like that for a limited number of time. And don't tie the number of rounds to your intelligence modifier because that means 5, and 5 rounds is going to be all of combat. Make it 1 the end of your next turn or something like that because that actually means that you have to be strategic about when you use them. So, yes. Finally, the Nimian Scholar. This is supposed to be a healer. This is the only one that actually gets an expanded spell list, which I found interesting. For a full spellcaster to have their subclass not give them an expanded spell list is a little bit weird. Most full casters and most half casters, to be honest, get an expanded spell list when they pick a subclass. And one of the nice things about an expanded spell list is it lets you limit your actual spell list for the class. You can put significantly less spells in the actual spell list. And then for your expanded spell lists, you can use that to customize the kinds of spells that are really only going to be useful for that particular subclass. And that's really what they do here. The base spell list for the Arcanist doesn't have a ton of healing spells available to them. The expanded spell list is almost entirely healing spells, which makes sense because it's supposed to be that. There are 2 different ways expanded spell lists work. One of them is expanded spell list are you know them, you have them always prepared. The other one is they're added to your spell list and you can learn them. This is the latter, which due to the fact that the Nimian Scholar, most of their abilities require you to cast healing spells, which are almost entirely located in your expanded spell list. It's not really a choice. You have to take these spells or you can't use the rest of the class. And if you're going to base the rest of the class on things that you could decide not to take, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. It's kind of like with a Tactician. If you didn't take Tactical Position, which allows you to use the help action as a bonus action, you can't use most of the good aspects of the class, the Tactical Eye and Chain Stratagem. Those are the most useful aspects of the Tactician, and it requires you to take a choice, which means it's not a choice. And if you're going to be giving them something that you claim is a choice, but if they don't take it, they can't play the class, and it's not a choice, and there's no reason for you. All you're doing is effectively punishing them for taking this subclass, because now you're limiting the number of spells that they can choose, because they have to choose these spells in order to play their class. So, yeah. The other thing you get at second level is Critical Heal. Basically, when you cast a healing spell and one of the die results is the highest possible, roll another die of the same value and add that number to the amount of hit points recovered. A critical heal may only occur once per healing spell. This is actually something that exists in other RPGs, and it's called Exploding Dice. I like exploding dice. The Zelda-themed RPG that I run every other Saturdays on Zelda Universe's Twitch channel, twitch.tv/Zelda Universe to the TV. We'll actually be playing this Saturday if you want to watch it. We use a system called Open Legend. And in Open Legend, all dice explode. So anytime you roll a die, if you roll the max, instead of getting a crit or anything, you get to keep that number, and then you roll again, and you get to add that to whatever you rolled. And the way that rolling works in Open Legends is you always roll a d20, and then depending on which attribute you're using, the level of the attribute will give you a number of additional dice. Like if you have a 5 in your might attribute, you roll 2d6 in addition to the d20. So a might roll with power 5, you would roll a d20 plus 2d6. If any of those dice land on, if it's 6s, they land on a 6. If the d20 lands on a d20, you keep the number and you roll again. And if it happens again, you keep it and you roll again. What that means in Open Legend is we regularly get rolls that are 30s and 40s and 50s. And I think the highest roll we've recorded thus far, just due to diminishing returns, was in the 70s for a single roll. It's really fun. It's really, 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 really fun to have exploding dice. So I am 100% okay with exploding heals. First of all, it makes heals significantly more useful in D&D, because right now heals are, until you get to high levels, heals are not nearly as useful as they could be. Generally, the best way to use your heals from a numerical standpoint is to wait till a creature is rendered unconscious and then heal them out of unconsciousness. That's going to give you the most bang for your buck. Because if they have 1 hit point and they take 20 points of damage, well, 19 points of damage don't matter. Because unless it takes them to negative their maximum hit points, they the additional 19 damage just disappears. Yeah, this would actually make even low-level healing spells significantly more powerful. I actually like the fact that they do limit it to 1 crit, 1 explosion per healing spell. I would much rather see it I'd like to see it level like cantrips do. So 5th level it can happen twice, 11th 3 times, 17 4 times per heal. Just because again, it's going to become significantly less useful the higher you go. So just letting it level up like that, I think, would be much more useful and would be fun. The best part of exploding dice is the fact that it's super fun. Like getting a crit is fun, don't get me wrong. But getting a crit in Open Legend where you roll your d20 and you roll a 20 on it is super, super fun because you've just added 20 to your roll and now you get to do it again. I've seen I've seen d20s explode, I think 3 times in a row. And that was when we got that like high. The other dice that they rolled were next to nothing, which is why we haven't gotten like an 80 or a 90 roll in Open Legend yet. But yeah, it's super, super fun. I like exploding dice. When they're used effectively, they can be a lot of fun. So critical heal, that is super cool. 6th level, you get Nimian Healer. Whenever you use a spell of 1st level or higher to restore hit points to a creature, the creature regains additional hit points equal to a proficiency bonus plus the spell's level. It just makes your heals a little bit more powerful. With critical heal, I don't think it's really necessary. And they do have things like this in D&D, and it's generally tied to your attribute score, not your proficiency bonus. So this would be one of the only times I will ever say, I think this should be tied to your attribute bonus, not your not your proficiency bonus. Yeah, that would be the only the thing I would say is tied to the attribute bonus, because it actually makes sense here. Which does mean that at 6th level, it probably means it's going to be 4 plus the spell's level, and then by 8th level, it's probably going to be 5 plus the spell's level, but at least then it makes sense because it's part of your spell casting. Yeah. 10th level, this is a mean word for someone without a stutter. For someone with it, I don't think I'm going to pronounce this right. Adloquium? Adloquium? Something like that. There's too many consonants in there. And the vowels don't look like they belong where they are, to be honest. The vowels look like the one dude in the lineup that they put in there just to say that they're not profiling. Like, really, they just seem out of place. So anyway, evil word, but let's see what it does. Whenever you cast a spell of first level or higher to restore hit points to a creature, you may expend one use of tactics to empower the heal. So this gives you a different use for your tactics. Granting them temporary hit points equal to the hit points recovered for 10 minutes. If a critical heal occurred, the target gains additional temporary hit points equal to half the amount of hit points recovered. This is overly complicated for what it does. I understand why. Again, we talked about this before. The Scholar is a shield healer. So it anytime they cast a healer, certain heals, they will leave a shield on the creature, which absorbs a certain amount of damage. This is generally based on the heal that you did. Like I said, I have an Astrologian, and currently they can be shield healers. And it can be really, really useful, because as soon as you get that shield on, whatever creature, whatever ally you've put the shield on stops losing hit points for a little bit while the shield takes the damage, and it can give you the ability to catch up on healing and the things like that. And if you do it preemptively, it means that you can focus on DPSing or mechanics or things like that before you have to start healing and things like that. So they're very, very useful in Final Fantasy XIV. Here, though, first of all, basically it means when you empower the heal, you double all of your healing spells. Because giving them temporary hit points effectively means, for the same amount that you heal them, means that all your hit points, all your healing spells heal for double the amount of the damage. It's just, mechanically, that's how it works. And it also means that healing creatures that are near full health is not going to be as detrimental as it would be for literally any other class that's doing healing in 5th edition to the D&D. One of the pitfalls of casting healing spells on people that are not unconscious is if you heal them too much, that additional health just evaporates into the ether. And it's a way to waste a spell slot. So generally, you don't start healing until people have lost a significant amount of hit points. With this, not only does the Scholar heal twice as better as any other healer in the entire game, whether it's a Final Fantasy XIV class or not, but they're also not limited by healing people that are near full health. So this massively unbalances how every other class works, especially since depending on the heal that you're doing, you could give a creature a 50 or 60 or 70 point temporary hit points. You could double their hit points depending on the heal that you use. And the other thing is, because it says whenever you cast a spell, you may expend one use of tactics to empower the heal. So if you do something like Mass Cure Wounds, you could give this temporary hit points to your entire party, which again massively unbalances the game. So I understand this is how it works in Final Fantasy XIV, where they cast heals and then they also get a shield. Final Fantasy XIV, again, is very, very different with how actions work. In 6 seconds, you can cast 3 or 4 heals. Easily. I've done it. One of the things that Astrologians have to do every so often is they have ability that removes your cooldowns for almost all your spells for a minute. So you just spam group healing spells for a minute, and it's super, super useful. But that means in a single minute, which is 10 rounds, which is longer than any combat, I will cast, because you're no longer worrying, or you really only have to worry about global cooldown. And even then, I don't think you have to worry about global cooldown. You just kind of spam them, 1 per second roughly. I can get 10 healing spells off in that amount at a time. And because of that, enemies do a lot more damage. Hit points are much, much higher. So it's not that big a deal in Final Fantasy XIV. In D&D, being able to double your healing by giving the full effect, which again doesn't actually happen in Final Fantasy XIV. I believe one, again I don't play the Scholar. I know for my Astrologian, one of them gives it a percentage of the healing you do, and another one does it for the whole amount. But it takes longer to cast the second one. Yeah, even in Final Fantasy XIV, I don't believe all heals just double with the shield. So yeah, that on its own is not great. And then with the critical heal aspect, adding in, okay, well now it does 1.5 times. That adds additional math that really isn't needed. Double healing is already really good. And with critical heal, that already means it's going to be even more powerful. You don't need to add another modifier to it to make critical heals even better. They're already really nice. You don't need them. And I would say with this, doing it for half the amount healed rounded down would make a lot more sense than equal to the amount healed and then 1.5 times when you get a critical heal. No, with critical heal, especially if you allow it to level up, it'll make more sense for it just to be half. It's still an interesting idea, and I like the idea of a shield healer because it's what it's supposed to be, and this would still make it work very uniquely. But this is super, super overpowered, and would make literally every other class in the game not worth it to try healing ever, because you will never ever be able to get anywhere near as powerful as a Nimian Scholar healer. And it also means, especially once they start using things like Mass Healing Word or Mass Cure Wounds, your party will very rarely, if ever, be taking significant amounts of damage. So, yeah. Finally, you get Nimian Savior. When you cast a healing spell, which will not grant temporary hit points, that creature gains 1d10 temporary hit points. This one doesn't make sense to me because it uses this. It uses the conditional future tense, which is will not, meaning when you cast the spell, there's nothing in the spell that is going to cause it to give temporary hit points. It doesn't say did not, which is the past tense. So this is based on whether the spell itself is designed to give temporary hit points, not if it gave temporary hit points. So according to this, really any spell that doesn't give temporary hit points, the spell itself will not give temporary hit points. The thing that will give temporary hit points is Aldo Kukuka, the word that doesn't work. So really, every healing spell will give 1d10 temporary hit points, which at that point I don't understand why the will not is in there. And again, this massively breaks the game because this means any healing spell, you've just increased the healing of any healing spell by 1d10. And because it's temporary hit points, it means that it's even more powerful than regular healing. Now, temporary hit points don't stack or add together or anything like that. So if you did use Alda since this would give you more temporary hit points than 1d10, this effect wouldn't trigger. Which is another reason why I don't understand why the will not is in there. Like I said, the phrasing of this doesn't make sense. If it's meant to be that all your healing spells now also give temporary hit points, it's massively broken and doesn't. We can just throw that out. If it's meant to be spells that can't somehow work with Aldequayam can now give temporary hit points, I don't see how that could be a thing. Like, the whole ability just doesn't make sense as written because it has limitations in there that don't make sense because they're unnecessary. If this just gives any healing spell that doesn't give temporary hit points, which in general, healing spells in D&D don't give temporary hit points. You have spells that give temporary hit points. They are completely different spells. Healing and shielding are considered two different actions in 5th edition D&D. And most spells that shield you in any way are a different school of magic completely. I have to look because for the life of me, I can't remember. They are abjuration spells, will give you shields. Necromancy spells are actually the ones that heal you. In general, I believe all healing spells are. I'm gonna try just looking up real quick because I believe. Let's try wounds. Well, let me. There we go. Inflict wounds. Cure wounds. Isn't that a spell? Oh, for Pete's frickin' sake. I can't remember the name of the goddamn spell because my brain doesn't work. And it's not showing me the... it annoys me. Do it by level, you damn piece of shit. Inflict wounds. Maybe it isn't. Maybe they aren't necromancy spells. I'm sorry about this. I don't mean to do this, but my brain is fixated on it and I have to do it. I wish I didn't, but I have to. It's just how my brain works, and unfortunately. I want cleric spells. Urgh! Sorry, everyone. I promise this will be over very, very quickly. I promise. Just give me the damn... Cure wounds is... Evocation. Okay, so healing spells apparently are evocation. Resurrection spells are necromancy. And shielding spells are abjuration. So they're completely different spell types. So turning every single healing spell into an abjuration spell in addition to an evocation spell just doesn't make sense. So yeah. Talking about these summons, we've already talked about the summons last time, and for the most part, like I said, I think, well, let's do it this way since we've gotten through all three subclasses. Final thoughts. Overall, like I said, Tactician, throw away. We don't need a Battlemaster fighter that is also a full caster. It doesn't need to be a thing. It really doesn't. As far as the Tactician is concerned, if we can take Tactical Eye and change Stratagem and tie it to the Summoner, we'll do it for the Summoner, and we'll make it the Phoenix, because right now what I'm thinking is if we get rid of the Tactician, the Emerald Carbuncle and the Topaz Carbuncle can now be part of the Scholars thing, and they can also have access to Eos and Selene, and each one will just have a different focus that they do. Because the Scholar is going to be focused on healing, your bonus actions, which are going to be controlled effectively by your Carbuncle, by your summons, you could use those to either augment healing spells or give them the ability to do a little bit of damage while they are casting their healing spells, things like that. So your tactics and things like that would be stuff that would give each, like your Emerald, your Topaz, Carbuncles, and then Eos and Selene, each one would need to have a different kind of focus. Like maybe Eos could be, because it already has a shield aspect built into it, Eos could be focused on shielding, and Selene could be focused a little bit more on turning into kind of an anti-undead kind of thing, where it can do some radiant damage and the things like that. And then your two different Carbuncles could be... So something about Carbuncle that they don't really have in Final Fantasy XIV, because it would break the game really, really bad, is the summon Carbuncle in any other game casts Reflect on your party. And what Reflect does is, other than really, really super powerful black and white magic spells, it reflects whatever spell is cast on that person back at the enemy. And it's a really interesting spell to deal with, an effect to deal with. So I would really love to see either the Emerald or the Topaz Carbuncle, or maybe even just kind of focus them on the idea of the Emerald and Carbuncle. The Carbuncles are reaction-based summons, and they're specifically designed to reflect different types of damage back at enemies. Like the Emerald version could be based on reflecting any sort of spell cast, having something happen when spells are cast on it or on other creatures that allows it to reflect some of the damage or some of the effects back. Whereas the Topaz one is focused on physical effects. That, I think, would be really cool. So when you have your Emerald Carbuncle out, you can deal with spellcasters a little better. When your Topaz Carbuncle out, you can deal with physical damaging people a little bit better, and it's all about reflecting damage back. Whereas Eos and Selene are much more kind of active, where Eos is much more focused on shielding and kind of using temporary hit points in certain ways, and Selene is a little bit more aggressive focused, giving them things like radiant damage, or even giving them fire, or probably acid damage, since they already have the summoner would have access to fire damage through Ifrit. The reason I say acid damage is acid can be used to turn off a troll's regeneration, and there's quite a few other creatures that kind of follow similar paths, where it's either fire or acid, or radiant damage will turn off regeneration effects. So if we made Selene a little bit more built around the idea of being a little more aggressive and specifically designed to counter creatures that regenerate, even maybe giving it access to an ability similar to Chill Touch, where you can't regenerate hit points for a turn or something like that, I think that would be really, really interesting. And that would give each different summon something different to do. So Emerald Carbuncle is built around the idea of reflecting magic type things. Topaz is reflecting physical type things back at enemies. Eos is built around shielding, and Selene is built around turning off regeneration and healing. Whereas when we go to the Summoner, Ifrit would be built around kind of single target, just doing lots of damage. Garuda would be built around doing area damage. Titan would be built around protection and just protecting yourself or the party. And Phoenix would be built around a little bit more control stuff in the aid action and the thing, or the help action and things like that. Yeah, I think that would make a much cooler class. And then once we have that built, when we're looking at the subclass of the features, we can make them fit a little bit more. Like, I think one of the features of the base class should be a way to switch between roles. Or maybe each one of the subclasses has a different way that you can switch between summons, depending on, like, maybe the Scholar is designed to be a little bit more preparatory. So you can, their switching mechanic is built around doing it outside of combat, but they have unlimited uses of it as long as it's not happening during combat. And the easiest way to do that is to give it a minute cast time to be able to switch things. Whereas a Summoner is designed to be much more kind of reactionary, so allowing them to switch their Edgei mid-combat, but having a limited number of switches per short or long rest. Again, those things would be really, really interesting. And again, would differentiate the same mechanic, but would give a completely different style for how to do it. And because you choose it at second level, that would mean if we're going to call their Ethereal Ally their defining feature, which I think makes sense, Tactics and the defining feature I think would make the most sense. Tactics gets reworked into ways to kind of modify how you interact with your summon, and then your Ethereal Ally, your summon, is reworked to just be a list of bonus actions that you get, and each one will have a different focus. I think that turns this into a class that is kind of wishy-washy, but at the same time just massively overpowered, and into something that's going to be unique. It's going to be a lot of fun to play, and is going to give you a different style of play than literally anything else that currently exists. Even if you think about things like Minion Mancers, which are basically like necromancer wizards that are built around like summoning minions into the things like that, or druids that summon a lot of creatures to help them out into the things like that. As much as, again, from my own experience in the Adventures League, which, to be perfectly honest, the first couple years of the Adventures League, it was built around min-maxing. It really, really was. And most of the rulings that they made were made to try and prevent min-maxing, which never worked, by the way. Most of the stupid rulings that they made did nothing to stop min-maxing and just stopped people that wanted to play interesting classes from not. But anyway, even when min-maxing was a big thing, Minion Mancers was not. It was theory crafted all the time. You would hear people theory crafting it all the time. It never showed up on the table because it was such a boring and pointless style to play. Because when you first summon them, it could be really useful because you would get an additional 4, sometimes 6 extra people. But it slowed combat down to a crawl, so the rest of the party hated you. The DM didn't like you because they had to keep track of significantly more creatures. And depending on the DM you had, sometimes they ran the summons and sometimes they let you. And if they ran the summons, it was not useful at all. And both of those readings were not only correct rules as written, because the actual spells were not clarified super well in there. Wizards of the Coast actually supported both rulings as well. So it wasn't something that you could rules lawyer your way out of. They could completely hamstring you using one of these things. It made combat really, really a slog because whatever Minion Mancer was playing, their turn would take forever, and it generally didn't give that much of a bonus. Yes, it did unbalance it because you just got a bunch of actions for your side that the other. But in general, when you were summoning that many creatures, they were doing so little damage that they weren't helping anywhere near as much as they could. And most of the interesting things you could do with your action, you couldn't do with these minions. So until Tasha's came along, where you could kind of fight alongside your minions instead of using your turn to control your minions, as much as theory crafting, people used to say, yeah, no, this is super overpowered. In practice, it never happened. Because as much as it seemed like it should be useful, it wasn't. It never was. So this would give you the ability to kind of fight with your summoned creature in a way that doesn't exist. And then again, turning it into a half caster would mean that your tactics could be things that could be split a little bit between some tactics that would take your action and some tactics that would take your bonus action, or change how you use your bonus action. Basically, if I've been getting into Numenera and the Cypher system recently, and there's certain kind of abilities called enablers. And enablers are skills or abilities that you take that simply let you do something. They give you, access to something, like they give you training in a skill, or they let you use certain kinds of weapon. Those are called enablers. And then other ones are just called actions. And so we could actually turn the tactics into about half of them being actions, where they actually take your action. And the other half could basically be what I would consider enablers, where you're already using your bonus action to control your edgy. Whatever their quote-unquote actions would be are translated to your bonus actions. And so your enabler tactics would basically give your summons a new ability they could use, or change how one of their abilities works. Again, the reason I'm not completely redesigning this class is because this is something that's going to take a fair amount of work. Thank you, phone. It's going to take a fair amount of work, so I can't really go into complete specifics. But from what I've outlined here, I think that would make a significantly better and more fun class to play. The combination of tactics and your summon effectively being your bonus action, and each summon just being a different set of bonus actions you get to equip to yourself, and the different subclasses having different ways to change that equipped set. This could turn into a super, super fun, interesting class. From a mechanical standpoint, it wouldn't be complicated, but it would give you a lot of choices. And that's something that, again, I see a lot of the stuff in this supplement as just adding all of this complexity and thinking that makes everything better, and it doesn't. What I'm describing is not a complicated system. Each thing gives you a set number of bonus actions you can use. We're not creating a new system. We're not giving you any additional actions or anything. No, we are giving you different uses for your bonus action, which is a system that already exists. And then to add complexity to it, you can switch those systems. And we will give you a way to do that. But that is one additional thing, and it's going to be tied to either an action or a bonus action. So as much as we've given you all these choices, we haven't added a ton of complexity, because the only thing we've changed is what you can use your bonus action for, but we haven't added a new action. You're not really keeping track of additional things. You'll just have an extra stat block that you look at when you're using your ability, when you're playing your character. And then to switch them, we're not creating a brand new system that, regains uses after different ways. No, we're just going to say you can change that, and this is how you do that. And it's really simple. It's really, really basic. It doesn't require a lot of abject thought or anything like that. But by just doing those two little things that don't add a ton of complexity to it, but increase the number of choices you have, that is complexity improving the game. It does make things slightly more complex, because now you have more uses for your bonus action. But that complexity is required to give you more choices. If we were to design a brand new limited resource, and then different limited resources that you can keep track, like the Mudra system, there's 3 different types of Mudras you can do and all this stuff. Well, yeah, I mean, you could do something similar like that for that. Like you have edgy points, and then you also have enkindle points, and all that stuff just adds complexity, and it's not necessary to give you more choices. It just adds complexity for complexity's sake. And that is a detriment that takes away from the enjoyment. It doesn't make it more valuable. It makes it less valuable. It makes it less fun to play. And it increases the barrier to entry for anyone that wants to play the class. Anytime you add more complexity, it makes it harder to learn the class, which means less people will play it. So, yeah. So that's my idea. Otherwise, that's going to be all for me today. As always, if you enjoyed this, like, subscribe, turn notifications on, and in the comments below, let me know what you guys think about the different version of this, especially since the Summoner is basically getting reworked for Endwalker. It's going to be almost a completely different class when they're done with it in Endwalker, which comes soon. I think it would make sense to rework this to work with the new version in Endwalker. I think that would make a lot of sense, and I think the way I describe it would be cool. Let me know in the comments down below. And for one of you that I will not name, I know what you're thinking. We've already had this conversation. I'm actually, after I'm done recording this, I'm going to go reply to your comment. You're still wrong. And I you keep bringing up examples that prove my point. So bringing up, oh God, my brain is not working. Bringing up artificers and rangers proves my points because they're half-casters. Bringing up the Warlock proves my point as well, because they're not even a half-caster. They have even less spell slots than any other class. So every example that you bring up, other than Planar Binding, which I've already mentioned, is a completely, almost worthless ability, because it requires multiple spellcasters working together in order to get it to work. And at the end of it, you have to fight the thing you bound. And if it fails, you have to fight the creature anyway. So other than that, like I said, a full caster with a pet doesn't work in 5th edition. There is no class that has a static pet plus being a full caster currently in the game. And the reason it doesn't is because it doesn't work in 5th edition. It makes them too powerful. So anyway, again, that is all for me today. I will see you guys next time. All right, bye-bye.